welcome and thanks for tuning in to the Victorian Aboriginal News Van Talks podcast. I'm your host, Charles Parkiner.
Victorian Aboriginal News acknowledges and pays respect to traditional owners and custodians across Australia. We acknowledge the elders who have gone before, those who currently lead their communities, and those who will follow in years and generations to come.
Welcome back to the Van Talks podcast and thanks for tuning in. We are now back at Coranderrk with Uncle Dave Wandin. We had so much positive response from our last podcast, and thanks to all those people that got back to us. A lot of the questions we will be including in this particular podcast, so thank you very much. Uncle Dave, welcome back. Very short time in between, but welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Uncle Charles. Believe me, if you wait too long, it's very hard to reconnect the story. So
absolutely, couldn't agree more than that.
We want some continuity in the story.
Well, talking about continuity, we started off previously at 1863, finished off pretty well at 1924.
That's
and
right,
this was with the closure of Coranderrk.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is, because I'm really keen today to yarn about what happened from 1998 onwards. But let's hear what happened between 1924, the closure, and 1998. How did the Wandin family and the Nevin family get back onto this country?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting story, I think, anyway, because it showed even back then in 1998, well, from about 95, I think it was, that there were people who were working very hard towards reconciliation.
Yeah.
So although this place was closed down and all evidence of the village and the infrastructure that comprised Coranderrk Mission Station was demolished.
They'd picked it over, hadn't they, all the people from around the area?
They took away all the building materials, they dug it out of the ground and removed all evidence that we'd been here. But, and from 1924, it already began before that, but the land pretty much got carved up and sold to private enterprise.
Now, this was meant to be for soldier settlement post-World War I, wasn't it? But no soldiers actually ended up settling here.
No, that's right. Yeah, no one ended up being given a parcel of Coranderrk land under the soldier settlement scheme.
So where did all the mob go to?
90% of them were encouraged to go to Lake Tyers Mission, which at the time they were closing down all the mission stations and sending everybody to Lake Tyers pretty much. But my family, the Wandins, and other families too, actually stayed on the outskirts of town. You mentioned that last time,
Hillsville. You got jobs and bakers and everything like that, I believe.
All the men were working in sawmills.
Yeah.
There was lots and lots of sawmills around in those days. Right up to the 1960s, 70s, maybe even longer. Yeah, basically if you didn't like where you're working at one sawmill, you just said, stick it up your mum and go and sign on to the next one. They were everywhere. And there was people working for the Border Works and a whole range of, everybody had jobs.
Sure.
There were plenty of farms, whether it be cattle or sheep. We didn't have all the bloody wineries around that we got today.
So roughly how many of the Wandin family would have hung around here? I know we're talking 100 years ago, but roughly how many?
Yeah, so my grandmother stayed here.
Yeah.
In actual fact, my oldest uncle was the last child born here at Coranderrk.
Okay.
In 1922, 23, something like that. And they stayed here in Hillsville. So the generation above me, all my uncles and aunties, they all stayed here and grew up. How many other Wurundjeri people? There were some Nevins, but there were other, there was Wurundjeri people. There's quite a few Tanarong people that also lived on the outskirts. There was, Wurundjeri. I'm not too sure about any Gunai-Kurnai people, but there was quite a large contingent of Aboriginal fringe dwellers, if you like.
Well, we'd mentioned in the last episode that Coranderrk was actually a mishmash of mob, that they'd been brought in together regardless of their clan, kinship and everything.
Well, that was the same with every mission station.
Yeah, of course.
White people didn't it's the wrong word, didn't discriminate about how black you were. You were all Aboriginal, didn't understand our tribal moieties and our cultural protocols and things like that.
So how did the family survive, stay together, maintain its culture during that, 70 years up until 1998?
Well, basically we lived white. We did everything that we could to meld into society, which was what the government wanted when they shut down the mission stations. But we were lucky that we had 5 brothers and 2 sisters in the generation above me.
Right.
And they stayed strong together. All the men worked to actually help the girls go to school because they said, we need to change the world. And so if anybody's heard of Auntie Joy Murphy, she went on to
course.
university.
Yeah.
And that was supported by the men of that generation actually putting a part of their pay to make sure that she had that tuition. Is the story that, as I know it, because I can't imagine how someone can become, well, we know now, but how could someone become that smart without going to a university? And she is, the matriarch of that generation today.
Very highly respected.
And if any of us have got issues, we still go to Auntie Joy and ask advice. And she can normally point us in the right direction. My eldest boy talks to her all the time with the work that he does at Melbourne University. Yeah, so very close connection. It's very hard. You can't break that family connection.
And that's a great
Even
thing.
I was taken away for 30-odd years, but coming back was just like coming home.
So talk to me about coming back. So it was about 1996, 1998?
Yeah, 96 when I came back to Hillsville. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So when did Coranderrk, albeit in a much smaller form, come back into the hands of the mob?
98.
And what happened then? Because
Well,
it wasn't just handed back.
No, it was a very, very long fight, actually. But the previous owner that lived here, a woman called Barbara Tan. So one thing that they did discover here, in the building just behind you there, was actually a whole heap of paperwork from the mission days.
And what was of particular prominence in that paperwork?
Well, basically, she started to read through it and she realised the importance of this place. And she actually helped our families apply to the government. She said, I don't belong here. This belongs to you, and I will fight on your behalf.
So was the story of Coranderrk as a mission actually being lost up until that point?
No, we knew about it, of course,
Right.
but no one was listening about it. No one was listening to
But
it.
in the broader community, obviously, this is something that
Oh.
people didn't want to hear about.
No one remembered or didn't want to remember.
Right.
Got wiped off the land and wiped out of people's minds.
Which is, of course, what the government wanted back
Yeah.
in 1924.
Exactly, yeah.
So with the discovery of that paperwork and the desire of the person who found it to share the message, what was the follow-on from that?
Well, basically, the women of the Wurundjeri tribe, to my knowledge, did most of the work. And all the petitioning,
Yep.
like William Barrack did to keep Coranderrk, they took on the role of doing all that petitioning to get land given back.
And this was back to the state government.
Yes, to the state government, yeah. Even though it was funded, it eventually did have to go to the federal government. At the time, we know it as the ILSC now, but it was ILC back in those days. And eventually, yes, they won, and we got the 200 acres back. And we had a massive celebration here. We got some land back. But we didn't actually share it with anybody. We kept it very much within our own little family groups. But we had a wonderful time. We set up a little camping spot down at the bottom edge of the corner of the property here, which is the Yarra and the next door neighbour's fence. And there's a nice, beautiful little sandy beach, So, we all went back to the old days, being told the stories of fishing from our Granny Jemima, taught Uncle Juby and my dad and other people when it was the mission. Sorry, not when it was the mission.
When it was a gathering place, because you mentioned that last time.
Yeah.
Prior to the mission days.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we sat around lots of campfires and told stories. And I guess that's where my generation now has kind of picked up the cudgel, if you like, to continue to preserve the story.
But was that the goal back in 1998, or was it just, wow, we've got the land?
Yeah.
There must have been a moment where, what the hell do we do with this?
Exactly right. And that took quite a few years.
I can imagine.
We celebrated it, and we had an register here that was, because there was always cattle.
Yeah.
Even when it was the mission station, but all the subsequent owners also ran cattle on here. So we had someone managing the cattle. Pretty much, we went, we got firewood for all the rest of the family in town, and lots of fallen down trees, so lots of chainsaw parties, if you like, trailer loads and trailer loads. And we felt we were doing pretty good. But there came a time when you started talking to other people that nobody knew the story. Jackie and Brooke Wandin was sitting here one day and says, we can't keep this just for ourselves. We need to raise the profile a bit.
So when would this have been, roughly? So early 2000s?
I'd have to go back and check the poster, but 2010s.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So quite recent.
Yeah, so we had it for roughly about 12 years before we thought, this can't be all there is to this land.
More than chainsaw parties on the beach down there.
Yeah, way more.
Mm.
I mean, yes, lots of people learn to test out their four-wheel drives and their motorbikes across the land, and kids learn how to swim and those kind of things. But yeah, we thought we need to do more. And this was Jackie and Brooke's idea more than anyone else. And so they said, let's have a concert. And how are we going to do it? Doesn't matter, let's just do it.
Sounds like the start of Woodstock.
Well, it could have become that. The reality is that the concert was an absolute success. I won't go into the details of all the background work that they had to do to get the funding and whatever.
Can imagine.
But it was a success. Yeah, I think there was going to be 300 tickets and there's like 700 people turned up.
Goodness me.
But it's a lot of work to run a concert.
Yeah.
And the concert itself didn't benefit the land.
So what
but
was
it
the
raised awareness.
Right, so that was the main goal,
it
just
was
to raise
raising
awareness of
yeah.
Coranderrk.
Yep.
Okay.
So they did 3 concerts, 3 years in a row. But if anybody's ever been a concert organiser, it's a special type of person.
Yeah.
It's absolutely exhausting work. They thought we'd need to do more. We need to look at the whole of the land, not just a place where we can hold a concert.
All right, but you were living here at that stage. You and the family were living here, is that right?
Living here in Hillsville.
In Healesville.
Yeah.
So the land was just...
That we would all come and visit.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
on the hot days and the birthdays and the weddings and the 21st and all those kind of things. This was the place to hold the parties.
It wasn't being used for anything else apart from that and the concerts for 3 years.
That's right. The only income was the cattle.
Right.
Which
the
is
adjustment. Yep.
Yeah, which is, even today, it's still only enough to cover the rates and the insurance and some minor maintenance things. And yes, did make a lot of money out of the concerts. So little think tank got put together, and one of them was my youngest boy, Darren, alongside Jackie and Brooke. And they said, let's look at the rest of the land. Let's think about what William Barrack and Simon Wonga, what their dream was for Coranderrk, or what their goals were for Coranderrk. And they said, how can we continue the legacy, particularly of Barrack, of what his intentions were?
Because if we just remind the audience right now, it was the recognition of this land not just being as culturally important, as a gathering place for all the different nations, but also as a rich source of food and resources.
Food and resources, yeah.
And this is what the three of them decided, that's what we need to live up to again.
That's right.
Right.
So how do we go about that?
So how do you go about that?
Well, first off, you have to look at the land, and pretty much, I would say that more than 60% of this land, maybe even 70%, was blackberry.
Oh, crikeys.
But like everyone else of our generation and younger generations, think the blackberry belongs here. And of course it doesn't.
No.
I mean, yeah, we still had people would come and pick blackberries, but you could never pick them all. There were so many of them. It was actually degrading the land. We were overstocked on cattle. The cattle were only drinking out of the little dam that we've got up the top here, but most of them, the cattle were drinking out of the river. And we started to think more holistically about what we were doing with the land. And basically we were seeing that we were letting the land destroy itself. So they said, okay, what do we do? So we applied to the government. We've got some funding to do a farm management plan.
Okay.
So still keeping in the thinking economically, we weren't quite deep enough into the culture at that stage. When we got some experts out who looked at the land and said, well, this area here is no good for cattle and that area is no good for cattle because it doesn't grow the right grasses and it wouldn't grow the right grasses because it is on a floodplain. 80% of the property is on a floodplain. He said, what I would recommend is you actually fence those off and you put in vegetation, as in trees, shrubs, which fitted into what my son was doing, which was conservation land management.
Yeah.
So it fitted right into his ethos and, what he was planning to do, which is when I got called in because I'd actually finished off his training for him. He started his training at Zoos Victoria, but he'd come and work with me with the NARAP team to finish off his conservation land management.
And for those listeners who may not be aware, the NARAP team is essentially a branch of the Wurundjeri woi-wurrung that Uncle Dave founded back when?
2012.
2012, which is really well known across Melbourne, if not Victoria, as one of the premier land management services out there. It's very steeped in culture and seeking to bring back the old ways of bush management.
Land management, looking after country, while combining the modern methods that are available to us. Because remember, the old ways of managing country, we didn't have the weeds that the NARAP team has to deal with today.
Didn't have blackberries either,
You didn't have blackberries. I'm trying to think. Someone said something to me about blackberries. Oh, that's right. It was a government person. I can't remember what department it was, but they were in conservation.
Yeah.
Right? And seriously, they walked up to me and they said, so how did your ancestors deal with the blackberries?
And your response was?
Even that I said, well, they didn't. And she said, oh, is that why it's so bad today? I said, no, they didn't deal with it because they didn't exist before the white man came here. Anyway, it was a sort of a light bulb moment that people have got this concept that everywhere that they go and they see blackberry and they see willows and they see all these plants that have been brought in from the Northern Hemisphere, that they've always been here. Some people can't comprehend that they've only been here for a short time and they're not doing good things for the land.
Yeah.
That's a little sidebar. So
you were brought back in. This is where
I got brought back in as the NARAP team as a contractor to help with all the fencing and the blackberry control.
Right.
Installing 6 kilometres of electric fencing controlled by solar and then dealing with the blackberry in the paddocks. It's still an ongoing thing that we're still doing today, is looking after the conservation areas, the actual river frontage of dealing with the blackberries there. And immediately the land started to recover. Once we'd fenced off the wetter areas and excluded the cattle out of that, we are seeing native foods come back. And this is where I came into the idea is, hey, if this is what the land is telling us that it can support. So we're thinking about the future of Coranderrk, right? So we've got the farm management up and running.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy about it, but it's still not actually going to bring us a lot of money.
So let's look at
how we can diversify the land.
And that's what I'd like us to talk about now. So you and I have talked previously on a couple of occasions of your plans and the plans of the family here to bring in native foods, but there's still that very real loss of knowledge and culture. A lot of these native foods have got to be managed in a specific way. They've got to be prepared in a specific way.
That's right.
How much of that is lost? Let's be real.
85% of it.
How do you get it back?
Look, there was a lot of recording done of native bush foods.
Right.
There were some really good professors, and one that I refer to as the woman who wrote the Bible on bush foods is Dr. Beth Gott, the first woman ethnobotanist in Australia, who worked very closely with all the mobs up and down the east coast of Australia and Tasmania, very respectfully, and gathered a hell of a lot of information. But it's not conclusive. So as much as I getting into conservation and land management, trying to bring back culture, it was all about getting native plants back. Most people think about native plants, they think about putting trees in. I started to think about foods. And not just our seeds and plums and fruits, but actually our foods that grew under the ground. And then starting to investigate what we knew about our underground food, if you like.
So
yams. Yeah, yams, lilies, orchids, native geraniums and pelargoniums, things like that. And then starting to work out, finding the conditions that they will grow in. Did they grow here before? And that evidence is a bit scattered, and it became almost a bit too much to be able to do.
What do you mean a bit too much?
Well, it was a lot of hard work, and it was going to take more time than we thought. But the land was still telling us. There were new grasses popping up, so there are seed grasses that are popping up.
And were those the tell signs, the new species that were popping up?
Well, they weren't new. They were old species that were recovering
dormant
because we controlled the invasive European stuff that we've got here. So it was still telling the story, and so we're continuing it. We knew it was going to be a struggle, but AgVic heard about what we were trying to do, as well as other Aboriginal mobs across Victoria, and it just so happened that they put up some funding to help everybody get kick-started, if you like, here in Victoria. And, of course, once you do that, you've got funding. That's there on government websites and people can look it up. And Melbourne University came across it, and they said this is a very, very interesting space, particularly with climate change.
Melbourne Uni's done a lot of good work in this area, haven't they?
Well, in this area, this is new for them, because one of the big things, of course, this is where you get into the politics of intellectual property.
ICIP, yep.
So we spent more than a year talking to Melbourne University and writing an agreement. So they offered a standard agreement, and we said, no, that does not suit what we want.
But what was this agreement for? What was it going to deliver?
Well, it was about that they would record everything that we did, and they would then own that knowledge.
Oh, that's a bit
kind
touchy.
of a standard thing that universities do.
Yeah.
But no, we spent time flipping that on its head.
Right.
So we were approached by Food Sciences, Melbourne University, because then started to realise, although I kind of knew it, because food scientists around the world and agricultural scientists are already reporting substantial losses of what we call modern cropping.
Yeah.
Because of climate change. They basically convinced us, we will help you do whatever you need to do, because they actually believe that our native foods are the answer to Australia's food bowl, particularly Melbourne's food bowl. We don't grow very many vegetables here in Victoria anymore. Pakenham is now all houses, which is sort of our food bowl for Melbourne. We don't have that. We rely on Queensland now. And we've already seen breaks in that supply chain through floods and fires and just climate change in general, and the various pests and diseases that are coming into the country. Yeah, so they're very future-looking, and that's become our goal now, is, okay, let's relearn what we can. So you asked to talk to Brooke today. Brooke is actually in the archives in Melbourne University. So there's a whole protocol to go through that, about having access to the archives.
So what are the big challenges you've got, though?
Well, the big challenge is I don't think we're going to have enough land to grow what we need to grow, even on the 200 acres, considering that 80% of it is a floodplain. So we've only got the high ground up here, so it's still very experimental. We now know we're probably not going to make any money out of it.
So you've really, of those 200 acres, you've got, 40 acres in that case?
Yeah, if you're working on 80%, but it's probably not even that. We do need to keep the high ground for when the ground floods so that we can bring the cattle up onto the high ground if we have to.
Okay, so let's halve that again at least.
Yeah. I reckon we're probably only looking, at the moment, pushing it around 5 acres that we can suitably used for growing.
All right, so let me push you then. What can realistically be achieved in only 5 acres?
A hell of a lot. Because even if we don't make money out of it, we can teach.
Okay.
What we learn from this land by experimenting with different varieties, by being able to use the labs of Melbourne University, so that as we grow these foods, one of the things we know needs to be identified is a lot of our foods, if they weren't prepared properly, can actually make you sick. And everybody goes, oh, we don't want to grow them. But I've got to remind people, well, hang on, you grow rhubarb, you know exactly. You can't eat the leaves.
Yeah.
You grow a lot of foods that need processing.
Yeah.
No different to us. We all need to eat. And we learnt to live with what the land actually has provided for thousands and thousands of years. But the big thing is, because of the climate change, is that people are looking at the answer, because we know through Beth Gott's work that these plants were actually very super nutritious compared to modern crops today. We know that native plants don't need anywhere near as much water as modern crops today.
Which is critical in Australia.
And they do not need as much fertiliser.
Yeah.
Actually, the less fertiliser, the better. But we still need to work out what all those balances are.
So what are the crops you're experimenting with right now?
Well, our focus is on tuberous crops.
Okay. So
the yam daisy, the Aboriginal potato, as it's sometimes referred to, all of our lilies. But we have some water plants as well. A plant called Bulbochinus, I don't know the Aboriginal name. We have a plant called water ribbons. That's a big hit. It's one of those things like everybody who eats a foreign meat, it tastes like chicken. But the water ribbon, if you give people...
It doesn't taste like chicken, does it?
No, it doesn't taste like chicken, but they actually get 3 different versions.
Yeah.
It's got an apple taste, a really crisp apple taste. It can taste like a celery, but it can also taste like a cucumber. It depends on whose mouth is actually eating it.
Yep.
But all I can tell you is that everybody loves it.
So how much of that are you growing or experimenting with?
We're not growing. It's still growing there wild in the fenced-off wet areas where we've excluded the cattle, and it's just come up by itself.
So what crops have you actually introduced here or reintroduced here?
Well, we're still experimenting in raised garden beds to see what's going to work here first. So we do have the murnong, the yam daisy. We do have the bulbine lily, pale vanilla lily. We have the native geranium. And without going around to the corner, we've got a few more. There's 35 plants that we're experimenting with.
Have you tried them all?
No. No, we haven't. We haven't actually been able to get a large enough crop to even taste. Because so many people want to understand about the plant, and quite often we're pulling them up to show what they look like.
So you're starting right from scratch. You're understanding the basic botany of all this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I could grow it. I could get a plough in here and do rows, and I could grow the stuff.
Yeah.
But I can't sell it. We could grow it and eat it for our own community, but because there are too many unknowns in the makeup of that food, what are its basic chemical makeup? Do they have poisons in them?
So this is a major long-term project.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
When do you see a point in time where you can sit back and think, right, we've got a couple of crops that we understand now, we know what their botanical breakdown is or their makeup is, how to deal with them, how to prepare them? What are we looking at?
And that's right. Yeah, that's why we have engaged with Melbourne University, so we can use their food scientists. They can cook it, half cook it, they can steam it, they can roast it, and they can pull it apart and put it under their microscopes and computer things and whatever, and tell us what the reactions are, and then we can then start to market that. But it's again about looking at, in today's modern world, how do we store this stuff? We've got a leaf that grows here. It's a native pepper leaf, but as soon as you pick it, it starts to wilt. So you need to be picking it and using it in your food straight away.
Wow.
But so there are other things we need to do. We have got a commercial kitchen here to do our own experimentation as well. So we're using as many avenues as what we've got. But in the meantime, we don't know if it's going to be a success or not. But even if it's not, this place has already become an education centre. So we can teach people about animal husbandry.
Yeah.
We can teach people fencing methods. We can teach people conservation land management because we've got 25% of the land is now dedicated to conservation. We can teach what we do know about bush foods, and I'm hoping that some of those younger people that we're inviting in will want to go off to university and become scientists. So it's okay to rely on what we orally know, but we believe if we do want to preserve our knowledge, we do need to write it down. There need to be records kept somewhere.
How many people are working here now, Dave?
With our volunteers, on our volunteer list, we have about 45 people.
But how many people would be here sort of over the course of a week?
Oh, 3 of us, if we're lucky. There's myself, there's the farmer who helped us do the land management plan and his cattle, and Jackie's partner.
Yeah.
We're kind of the active daily type people, but that's still not daily. We're all working actually other jobs.
So who's funding all this?
Some of it we raise by having a visitor program. And
Yep.
we charge people to come in, and we give them cultural education, take them on walks and talks and things like that. But yeah, we're still heavily relying on government funding.
Does the government recognise the importance of what this place is and the potential that it has to solve the supply chain and the food bowl problems?
No, that's one of the things. So through the Agriculture Victoria funding, which is focusing on the bush foods, we are still working through that on the supply network chain, because there are 8 mobs across Victoria doing it, and we're all at different areas, and we're all growing different things which we believe are more suitable to their particular country.
And what's the relationship between those 8 different mobs? Are you exchanging information?
Oh, yeah. So we regularly get together once a month as a general catch-up.
Yeah.
And every 3 months, there's not so much a conference, but we get down to sort of more nitty-gritty detail about what the next steps are. And one of those big things was intellectual property.
Yeah.
And then the other one was, how do we increase the capacity and bring people in? Because eventually, and some are already doing it, we'll need nurseries to actually collect the seed and start propagating it. We are building a nursery here. Wurundjeri, I think, we're lucky to actually acquire an abandoned nursery.
Wurundjeri nursery is incredible.
Yeah,
Been up there before and it's amazing.
From what I understand, they're producing 1 million seedlings a year.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Well, it's got the capacity to produce 1 million seedlings a year. Yeah. We're not looking at anything on that scale here.
Not yet. Not yet,
Yeah.
Unc. But I mean, is that something that could be conceivable in the future, whether in your lifetime or your son's?
I like Walt Disney's quote, if you can dream it, you can do it. Many people have told me, you'll never get that done. And I just go, watch me.
So what are your biggest challenges, your 3 biggest challenges right now to achieving that dream?
Wow. To put it down into 3, recurrent funding.
And it's got to be government funding, hasn't it, really?
Well, eventually we would like to look at private enterprise investing on the broader Victorian scale through AgVic. But yes, we are looking for philanthropists. But at the moment, yes, we rely totally on government funding and what revenue we can bring in by running our basic education programs that we do have here. But yeah, we do want to expand this into a training centre where young Aboriginal people, old Aboriginal people too, if they want to change in career, can come and learn about things that they may have thought were lost.
Uncle Dave, by the way, was looking at me when he mentioned older people looking to change their career. Not going to happen.
Yeah, I took on this challenge. I'm 63 now, and I took on this food challenge, if you like. I only started doing that in 2019. I've only been doing it for 5 years.
Hope for us old fellas yet then.
There's no chance I'm going to retire.
So recurrent funding is one challenge.
Yep.
What's another challenge?
It's enticing our young people to come in, to give them opportunities. At the moment, it's all done with volunteers. No one's getting paid.
So when you say young people, it's specifically young Aboriginal people, or just young people full stop, you don't really care?
Well, yeah, we are looking primarily for young Aboriginal people to help them connect back to their culture and give them opportunities to actually have a trade if they want it. So with our commercial kitchen, if they want to go into the food service industry, we can make that available. We already have a partnership with Yarra Valley Winery Association, and their chefs have been out here and we've given tastes of some of our foods, and they're heavily interested, but they're waiting, before they make an investment. But the chefs are already saying pretty much whatever you can grow, we'll buy.
So how do you get young people interested in this?
It's a good question. We haven't got around to how do we do it. I mean, we can advertise. And, yeah, we are basically using word of mouth. We've got some young people that are coming out here where...
But they'd be volunteers, wouldn't they?
In the beginning, and that's the hard part. Yeah.
That's your catch-22, because you still have that recurrent funding, but you need to get young people out here, and young people need money.
So therefore, you've got to have sales. And without the sales, you're not going to get employees. You know?
All right, so
but I think as we build it and we start to make money, currently we only have actually one paid employee, and she's only paid 1 day a week. Because that's all we can afford. You would start off with one. From little things, big things grow.
Absolutely.
We all know that. She was only employed just last year, and we're hoping that we'll employ a second person this year. And the year after, we'll employ a third person, depending on once we get our nursery up. So we don't actually just have to grow plants that we're going to plant in the ground here. We can actually farm gate sell plants out of the nursery. So it's another revenue stream.
Yeah.
Now, we're looking at sustainability, so some current funding we're available for is increasing our solar capacity by installing more water tanks, so we're not relying on metered water from Yarra Valley Water, so it becomes a self-sufficient farm.
So it sounds like the third challenge is infrastructure.
Yeah, but we're getting there. The two buildings that we're sitting in between now were derelict buildings 5 years ago. No one believed that we could do it. But, again...
This is your jack of all trades coming into it, isn't it?
Absolutely. I see potential in everything. I think I spoke on the last one. Nothing is ever a disaster and nothing is irreparable. And, I just keep looking and say, okay, there's a little bit of damage over that land. What am I going to do there? And we don't take this blanket approach across the whole land. It's about looking at the damaged parts and saying, well, that's a problem. Where are my good parts where I can make them actually take over looking after the land themselves? Sometimes you don't have to go and do anything if you've got your good parts and they're allowed to spread across the land.
Last question, Unc. What benefit will this have to Victoria? Not to the Wurundjeri, but to
absolutely.
Victoria.
Yeah, well, this is another one of our long-term goals, that as we increase our capacity to have more visitor programs, one of the things that we will do is educate anybody. They don't have to be Aboriginal. To educate what they can grow in their backyard. Just like going down to Bunnings and buying tomatoes and cherries and Christ knows what. Here is another option. Yeah. Here is food that is good with you. Here is its, and again, working with Melbourne University, here is its nutritional value. Here is the way it needs to be stored. Here is the way it needs to be prepared. And here's the way you eat it. And here are the medical and the health benefits and the nutritional benefits of each individual plant. And so that they have an interest and say, hey, this stuff is really good for me. And hopefully they can harvest stuff here, cook it here, they can taste it and go, oh, I like that. Can I grow that in my backyard? And eventually we'll have Murnong growing in everyone's backyard, which will replace the potato. Just a little background, so I'm following food crops around the world now.
Yeah.
And the most recent one I've seen is Indonesia, who has actually lost more than 30% of their potato crop due to climate change already.
Jeez.
Yeah, 30%. It doesn't sound like much, 30%, but when you look at the figures of how many potatoes they produce, and it's in the millions and millions of tonnes.
Yeah, of course.
And you're losing 30% of it. They're losing hundreds of thousands of tonnes of product.
Yeah.
That's just one. That's just one crop. That was all they were focusing on. So, but you always see these things on ABC, iView, SBS that talk about these things, and it is happening all across the world.
But we come back to native foods which are better suited to these...
Which have been through climate change.
Exactly.
They've survived droughts and ice ages, and yet they're still, despite all the pressures put on them, particularly in the last 200 years, still actually exist.
How can people find out more about Coranderrk, the work that's happening now, and more importantly, how can people put their names forward to volunteer?
Yep, so we do have a website. Just type in Coranderrk or Wandin Estate. And again, we need, when we talk about infrastructure, that's one thing we are behind on, is our IT technology. So it's not always updated.
So it might be a bit of a clunky website, but it
is a clunky website, but it'll tell you the dates that we do have our volunteer days. I'm usually here, I try to be here every Tuesday regardless.
Yeah.
Because I need to program my work life rather than being opportunistic. Because, okay, my other jobs that I do, I've wiped out Tuesdays. That's preserved for here. So it's having this chat, may have been a visitor group, or if there's no one here, then there's always farm duties to do. Yeah.
Uncle Dave Wandin, once again, thanks so much indeed for coming on to Van Talks.
No worries, thank you, Uncle Charles.
For a full transcript of this interview, visit the Victorian Aboriginal News website at vicaboriginalnews.com.au. Until our next episode, stay safe and stay informed.